Hey, good morning, good afternoon. I would say those icicles hanging down from the edge of the building right there pretty much sum it up, right? That kind of tells us what's going on. So, with the way the weather's been, I've caught up on some viewing. In the last week or so, I watched on Netflix the Devo documentary. You remember Devo? Akron Sound. For a while there, a real sort of novelty act. The documentary was informative. I can't say that I was a Devo fan. I was just familiar with them, and I watched it because of the connection to Akron and Kent State. Incredibly informative. I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it to you if it's not real long, and I think it's even up for the Grammy for the best sort of musical long form. So I'll take that all for what it's worth. I would recommend it. One of the ideas that I took from that has interested me now, and I've begun to read some things about it, is that name Devo is built around a whole concept. And the whole concept that they were working with is the de-evolution of humanity. And that sounds like a crazy thing, and it is kind of crazy. So you might be the person who's like Kent State's shootings again, and people always talk about that. Let it go. I hear people tell me that. But this is a history thing that happened where we live, and I don't know if it'll ever be gone. It's part of who we are. Devo went to Kent State. The members of Devo went to Kent State and were there during the shooting, and then had this belief that the herd mentality and some of the treatment of others and the way we use technology and instead of as a tool but let it run our lives meant that we were devolving, that humanity was devolving. Interesting things to think about. Really was impressed with Gerald Casale, one of the members of Devo, and interviews from him through the decades, and the way he clarified what that meant and who they were. Just a good documentary. I would recommend it. And I am kind of now stuck with this de-evolution idea in my head, and does that begin to tell us how bad we need Jesus and what's going on in the world around us? And they started with that idea in the 70s. So take that for what it's worth. This actually is Preparing for Sunday. This is for Sunday, February 1st, 2026. And you're like, did I turn on Preparing for Sunday, or did I turn on Netflix commentary or Devo history lessons or what? But this actually is Preparing for Sunday. It's for the fourth Sunday after Epiphany. Again, that's February 1st, 2026. And we're going to take a turn this week into Matthew, into the 5th chapter of Matthew. And this week we get the very, 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 very famous text, the Beatitudes. It's Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Matthew 5, 1 through 12. So some of the background here on Matthew, some of the concentration on this text, and I'll kind of blend in why I'm thinking or what I'm thinking with Devo as we go here. Matthew, something I want to point out with that is Matthew is built around 5 discourses. The way Jesus speaks, teaches, talks to the disciples and to the crowds are segmented into 5 discourses or talks. The first one is chapter 5, 6, and 7. This is called the Sermon on the Mount. That's probably the most famous of the discourses. Chapter 10 is called the Missionary Discourse. Chapter 13 is the parable discourse, where it's about parables, he tells parables. Chapter 18 is the Community Discourse. This is where he talks about the church and what it would mean to be the church. And then chapters 23, 24, and 25 are the Olivet Discourse, which are less about what they're about and more about the location Jesus is at when he gives them. All right? And so this week we take a turn into the 5th chapter of Matthew as a warning and I think a reason to participate in preparing for Sundays. During Lent, I'm going to deviate from the lectionary. I'm going to deviate from it pretty heavily. The lectionary for Lent Year A goes into John quite a bit. I'm not going to make that leap with the lectionary. I'm going to stay in Matthew. I'm going to give us sectioned off readings from Matthew. And that's pertinent here. I'm mentioning it here because we're going to be in that first discourse, 5, 6, 7, Sermon on the Mount, basically now all the way through Lent. And so the work you do, or the concentration you do on wading through all the crap I talk about to prepare for Sunday, kind of pays off here in that we're going to stay in this same discourse. There's 5 of them, but we're going to stay in this one for weeks and weeks and weeks. And that gives us this sort of building knowledge of the context of this portion of Matthew, for what it's worth. And so what we get this week is the first part of that. 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount, which we're going to stay in for weeks. 5, 1 through 12 is the first foray into that, the Sermon on the Mount, and it starts with the Beatitudes. Well, actually, it starts with a framework that tells us that Jesus is on the Mount. And then it gives us, I think it starts there in verse 2, the actual blesseds and the Beatitudes. Blessed, I think Beatitudes come from blessed. I think it's B, like the letter B, I think is what they're doing, but whatever. I always tell you when we get to Beatitudes, whether it be in Luke or Matthew, which, by the way, those two Beatitude sections are completely different, the way that they speak and talk, and we're in Matthew this time, and these are the, I think, more famous of the two, but whatever. I always tell you that Luther's way of interpreting the Beatitudes, he called them an impossible demand, that these were things that were impossible for us to live into on our own, and that we needed help from God alone to save us. To connect that to that Devo thing that you're going to hear, it's in my mind so much now because I was really struck by it. If we are devolving, if we are letting our technology sort of take over and letting bad habits take over, and we're sort of no longer on a rise as humans, but we're kind of letting ourselves slip back into bad habits. If Devo's right about that, and I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about that in the next few weeks, this is an impossible demand that would save us. It would tilt us back toward looking to God. To be honest, I did not. This is another thing. As I looked into that de-evolution idea, I learned that it's built on a theologian, a sociologist, philosopher. So there's a lot of Christian content from a theologian about this. A whole new thing to me. I had never heard of it or spent any time with it, and so I'm going to hopefully in the next few weeks. But that this is an impossible demand, the Beatitudes are an impossible demand, is the way Luther talks about this text. And, the one thing that I don't like about that, and that I want to supplement that with, I think what Luther's talking about is of course right. I love Luther, and I'm going to follow that. But I think the thing that does is that also makes the Beatitudes into law, that they're an impossible demand makes them into law. I think there's also a pronouncement of grace here, that Luther's telling you, by telling you that it's an impossible demand, that he wasn't mourning or poor, so he's telling you that it's an impossible demand for some people. But I think the other side of this is that this is a pronouncement of hope for other people. If you have some of these issues pressing on you, a pronouncement that God won't leave you there, that God fixes it. And so it's an impossible demand. It's also a pronouncement of God's grace. That will be the gimmick of the sermon. The sermon is a law gospel sermon and we're going to actively teach ourselves to be both and law and gospel. I'm going to do a toggling between what's law, what's gospel in a hopefully fun, interactive way. And then I'm going to do a case study where we decide how could we be graceful, how could we follow the law here. So that's for the sermon, and it's built on this toggle between law and gospel, and you can see it here. And Luther's toggling towards law when he says impossible demand. But I think the other thing here is that this would be grace for people who are poor or in spirit, or who are hunger and thirst after righteousness. This would be also a pronouncement of gospel at the same time. So I like that impossible demand thing, but I think there's more to it than that sometimes, so whatever. So we'll get into Matthew 5 here, and again, I'm going to keep making references to that de-evolution and God pronouncing a new thing, and God does that work. We can't do it. And that seems to be an important Lutheran concept here. Okay, so yeah, what's John doing today? What are you talking about? I don't know. Good luck sorting through this. Matthew 5, which is where this text comes from. Matthew 5, 1 through 12. It's the Sermon on the Mount, the first discourse in Matthew. Is Jesus talking to the disciples or the crowds? There's a thing. The framework, and then the verses at the beginning of this portion and the verses at the end use the word crowds, like he's talking to the crowds. But when you get into the teaching itself, it seems to be geared to just the disciples. My thing would be, we're all in the same boat. We're all a part of this potentially devolving humanity. And so what do we do? How do we hear this? That we need God, because we're kind of falling apart over here on our own. A disciple and the crowds are two different places in life and would hear this differently. Matthew, it's hard to tell whether Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount to the crowds or to just the disciples inside the text. When you see it depicted in movies and stuff, it's the crowds. But if it's the disciples, Jesus would speak to the disciples differently than Jesus would speak to the crowds. It would tilt over into impossible demand for disciples, for people like you and I who are baptized, who have sat around the gospel. It tilts over into impossible demand because it's discipling us. It's asking us to grow. And we are learning to be more prayerful and to be more dependent on God. And that's what discipleship is. If it's to the crowds, it might tilt a little bit more towards grace, because here's people who are for the first time hearing that God is at work in a new way. And so, who it's to matters. At the end of the day, it's probably to both in their own way. And then, what's important again here is let's say humanity does have this problem with devolving. Herd mentality, not taking care of each other, falling apart, overly politicized as part of the de-evolution theology. And I want to, too dependent on politics instead of on God to fix things. Some things I want to look into with this, and that I'm interested in. If that's true, it's true for the disciples and the crowd. They're both human and they're both in the same boat. They maybe are just sitting on different chairs inside the boat, but they're inside the same boat. And Jesus might be daftly addressing both here. One of the other things to think about with the Beatitudes is that thing that I talk about in preparing, sometimes in sermons, but definitely in preparings a lot, is the word eschatology. In Jesus, the pronouncement is that the end times are upon us. Or will they be sometime in the future? Will the Messiah come and fix things? Remember that I am a realized eschatology person, that in Jesus the switch happened. And what eschatology is a reversal. It is a change from current predicament of falling apart, like de-evolution, and then it's this God does something, and now we're set on a new course. It's a fix. It's a reversal. I would say we get that in Jesus, and that humans mess it up. And so, I don't know how that fits de-evolution per se, because it's not necessarily a gospel proclamation per se. But what are these Beatitudes? A pronouncement that Jesus makes, blessed are the poor in spirit, and then the reversal happens? Or is he saying something else? I would say that these are a proclamation of how God looks and how God works, and where God is present. They're the gospel in that they are proclaiming to us where we can find God if in the middle of things like shootings or protests or government intervention in the middle of protests. All those things that were true with Kent State with Devo are kind of true of the last few weeks with us in the United States in 2026. Where's the reversal? Where's the eschatological fix? The proclamation of the Beatitudes itself would drive us with this impossible demand back to Jesus. It tells us where Jesus is, where God is, and it's also telling us that what often happens is humans working together move ourselves away from where God is at work, and then get baffled about why we're not where God is at work. And this is clearly proclaiming where God is at work. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's telling us where to go, because that's the place where God is going to show up. And so that's a lot of sort of the background, the things I'm thinking as I pray through the text for this week, and I've just kind of dumped them all on you. All right. So now a closer look maybe at the Beatitudes and some of the content here. Now the word blessed is makaris. There's a Greek word for it. It's a makarisis, blessed, and in the world of the Beatitudes, there's a real honor-shame thing happening. And so Jesus is talking to people. Everybody wants to honor each other and not be shamed in public. In Jesus' world, there's a different kind of honor-shame system than we would ever be able to understand today. And a lot of what's going on with the Beatitudes is this honor-shame addressing, which I don't know that will follow much. And if you wanted to know more about that, I could talk to you about it sometime. I think what Jesus is talking about is what builds versus what collapses, what builds versus what tears down. And so by the pronouncement of the Beatitudes themselves, Jesus is laying the foundation for what direction God is going to work, is going to build in, bring honor in. What collapses are these things that bring shame. And, when you're talking about building collapsing, which is which, and you're talking about things going on in the world around you, and then when I have watched that Devo documentary, we're talking, I think Devo's pointing out a society that looks like it's collapsing, and I think what that does is make this impossible demand where we are driven back to God to be put back on what builds, what is the reversal. And, so Jesus is saying here what builds versus what collapses. And it's a little bit shocking because the things that build are the things that you would think are the collapsing. And what's the collapsing are the things you think are the building, right? So like the poor in spirit, that should be a place that you think, well, I don't want that. And what Jesus is saying is you do, because that's where you're open to God doing something for you. So it's a reversal, and reversals are weird, and they get us in these backward thinking, I don't know, they just ask us to view the world differently because it's a reversal, and we don't like to view the world differently. We think we have it all figured out. So there's that with the blesseds. I'll make a quick mention here, and I'm not going to spend time on it here because this would be a 3-hour video, and you don't want that, and I don't want that. And I won't mention it probably in the sermon either. I'll just plant this little seed, and if you're interested in it, you can look into it. There is some structure to this, some poetic structure to the Beatitudes. You can see that in the way that they're actually written out in your Bible. There's also a flip over in person in who's being addressed. Blessed are they, and then towards the end it says blessed are you. And so there's some intricate pronoun changes. The person, is it first person, second person, third person, is rotating in this text. There's some reversal through that. That also plays into this. Is Jesus talking to the disciples or the crowds? Is he talking to the people who need the law or the people who need the gospel? And that's all at play here. Is he talking to people who think that culture is devolved and want saved? Or is he talking to people who think culture is the answer to everything and don't think you need saved because you can do it yourself? And the answer to all that is yes. And that's the interplay that's happening inside these Beatitudes. What makes them so timeless is that no matter which side you're on, they speak to you. If things are going well, they speak to you. If things are going bad, they speak to you. And they simultaneously tell you whichever boat you're in at the moment, God has a way of addressing both. And so these are timeless because no matter what pivots in our lives, we go back to these and they work. They either are law or gospel. They are either pronouncement of grace or scary things that tell us to get to work. And they're both at once. And that's what the sermon's going to do, is pivot between those two things. So So there's that. So I need to get down through this quick because I think I'm already getting real long-winded by now. The word poor here is tokoi. That's the Greek word that's here for poor. What that's talking about, poor in spirit, are people who have no hope in the world. Remember, Luke says, "Blessed are the poor," and there is no in spirit. Matthew adds in spirit, and that complicates what's being said. I think what's being said, people are never really clear on what that means. But what I seem to think is it means people have no hope in the world. They've seen the shooting at Kent State. They've seen the members of Devo were friends with the people who were shot and killed. And so in the documentary, they say, "I saw my friend's blood going out on the road next to me." And whether you think the protest should have happened or whether you don't, whether you want me to stop talking about Kent State or not, or whatever your feeling is, it's to imagine yourself in a place where you see someone bleeding out in front of you and dying. Whether you agree with how it happened or whatever, you can see the tragedy in it, or you can see the fear in it. And so no hope in the world, because the world has let us down. It's devolved. It's let us down. And that's that Devo thing. That's some of the, I think I can see it here a little bit, strangely enough. And then the reversal is stated here too. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and it's reversed. And it's reversed by God's work, not by the actual poor in spirit people, which are all of us. It's reversed because God reverses it, not because the people who are poor in spirit reverse it. And then the other key here is that maybe you don't feel poor in spirit today. Maybe you feel like you're great and everything's going well. This is also warning you that if you feel that way, you're straying from the spot where God is going to do the reversal, the saving. And when you stray from the spot where God's going to do the saving, you're just as much at risk as the people who feel like they have no hope in the world. And so that's what's beautiful about these words, is they're I don't want to say the word entrapment, but they're almost entrapment. No matter where you are in life, they speak to you, right? So that's what's good about it. The law, gospel, they're both. All right. Blessed are those who mourn. That one is kind of, blessed are those who are grieved. Blessed are those who are unhappy. This is the picture of Kent State, of people screaming out. This is the pictures we see in the news lately of people from either side of whatever, screaming or out in pain and grief and worry, and then that reversal. And this is, again, people who see and who know that it's not right. That they're going through something that puts them off kilter and in need. Luther and I would say it's scarier for people who think that they know how to work things out. Scarier to me when I hear people feel like they know the answer. It's scarier for me when people pretend like they don't need an answer. That's much scarier than people who are grieved. People who are grieved are begging for an answer. They know that it's not right. And Jesus, with the Beatitudes, is driving us back to that place. Are you mourning right now? If you're not, Jesus is saying, maybe you should be. And because that's where the reversal happens. So listen to the people who are telling you what's not right and who know something's not right. In 2026, with Devo having been around, come in, gone, faded, fallen away, we're sick of hearing about going back and sitting with people who mourn, and we spend a lot of our time avoiding these places, and then we wonder where God is. We pretend like that's none of our business, let's not pay attention, and then, because we're removing ourselves, we wonder why we don't feel God's presence, right? The next one is meek. That one would be sort of, blessed are those who are humiliated. If you take that Greek word, blessed are those who are humiliated. I would say that, why is he talking about Devo? Those are a bunch of nerds. That's nerd music for nerds. And so, blessed are those who are humiliated. And where people are humiliated, God's reversal is nearest. And that's where you want to be. Right, so that's that theme that I keep hitting on here, because that seems to be the main thrust of the Beatitudes. The big Beatitude to me is this one. It's, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Righteousness is, by the way, by hungering and thirsting for it, you're saying something's not right and I can't fix it myself. That is the gospel. That is a proclamation of the gospel. I don't feel good. I need help. That is the gospel. And so, because when you need help, you're looking to Jesus instead of to yourself. And so this is the core of the Beatitudes to me. And they're looking outward. And that word righteousness is associated with the word justice in the Bible. And what we're talking about when we use that word is not courtrooms and retribution, like gotta get even with that person. What we're talking about when we talk about justice is an evening out low places in people's lives so that they can see God's possibilities, see God's work. If the low point is their poverty, we even that out by giving them some food so they can say, boy, God helped me today. If we don't need food today, we talk about justice by saying we're going to put ourselves in touch with people who do so that we don't get too full of ourselves, so that we're understanding that this grace comes from God and not from us, right? And so we're talking about that reversal. We're talking about sitting in the place of the reversal. And we're talking about how thick-skinned you have to be, because you can't just turn this sort of blatant blind eye to stuff. You're actually being called to look at it more. Not to look at the news, per se. I'm not saying go watch the news. I'm saying put yourself in contact with someone who's poor in spirit, someone who's grieved. If you're not. If you are, then you know already what the Beatitudes are doing, right? Okay. And then that would mean put yourself in contact with someone who doesn't think they need this. The word about heart here is cardia. There's some talk about heart in the next Beatitude. That connects to that Old Testament thing I talk about, that God is opening God's emotions to humanity. The power of Jesus is not kingship or whatever. It's that God would open God's heart to us, listen to our hearts, expose God's heart. So that's a bit of what's going on here, is this exchange, this reversal, this unexpected way that God interacts, loves, and opens God's self to us. Remember in the Old Testament, when people are about to mess up, they have a hardened heart. They close off their emotions and say, I'll take care of myself. And they don't lament, cry out to God, connect to God. And so that heart part is playing with that. When it talks about peacemaking, boy, that's quite a call for 2026, for 1970 with Devo, for 2026 with us, for the world of the Bible. Boy, that's an unattainable thing if I've ever heard it, and we need to be prayerful about that. The word peace has got some roots in shalom, which is this evenness, not blocked from being able to be known by the heart of God. Not distracted in poverty, in hunger, in brokenness, but fixed. And shalom, evenness, justice, righteousness, those words are all kind of wrapped up to each other. That last part, the pronouns switch over, and instead of talking about them, those other people, it says, blessed are you. And I want to make one quick thing here. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to say in today's preparing. And I need to do it quick because I'm got to be running out of time. This is the most important thing I'm probably going to say today, which will go right over everybody's heads, but I ask you to think about anyway. When this says, blessed are you when you're persecuted, remember the pivot in the pronoun. Now it's talking to me and to you. It isn't saying, congratulations for putting yourself in conflict with people. That's what people think it's saying. What Christians keep doing is we keep saying, I know the answer and I'm going to go yell at those other Christians. And it does not say, blessed are you for fighting the good fight. Blessed are you for putting yourself in conflict. It says, blessed are you for choosing a path that gets you in trouble. And not trouble like shame on you, but trouble like you don't even know if you can survive anymore. And because blessed are you in that situation because you need Jesus. That's all that could save you. Persecution, and here's that point I want to stick in here. Won't spend too much time on it, but it's the most important point I'm going to say today for 2026 people. Persecution and conflict are not the same thing. Just because you're putting yourself in conflict does not mean you are blessed are you because you're persecuted. Persecution might involve conflict, but conflict does not necessarily mean it's persecution. And so what I hear people all the time doing is, well, I'm fighting this guy and I'm persecuted because of how I vote or that is not what this says. And, I can't spend enough time on it here, but that is the most vital point, I think, here. Persecution is when you are opening yourself to being where the gospel is, and then finding yourself yelled at, screamed at, the conflict's happening to you. Usually what people are doing now is they're putting themselves in conflict, and then they're saying, see, this makes me persecuted. Putting yourself in conflict is not the same as being persecuted, because that's not meekness, that's not humility, that's not the other things that are spoken of right here. That's not peacemaking. If you seek peacemaking to the point where people are mad at you, then it's persecution, right? So that's how you interpret scriptures. All these verses are together, and they play off each other. We don't like it because it requires sitting through preparing for Sundays, and we want to pull our hair out because what in the heck is Pastor John talking about and going on about? So good luck to you, which I always say. Be prayerful, because it's not me, it's God alone that can save you and get you through this. So what does this all mean? It means that someday when we gather together, we're gonna sit down and wrestle with law and gospel. The Beatitudes are both, and we have a culture right now where people are either all gospel all the time or all law all the time, and they're protesting, and they're involved in this de-evolution of conflict with each other because they either want to be law or they either want to be gospel. The reality is the Beatitudes are both, and that there is both would put both sides not in conflict but in need of saving. We're not supposed to be fighting each other because of course there's sinfulness. We're not supposed to be saying be more lawful, be more graceful. What we're trying to do is say, how do we be both together? And I'm going to be persecuted probably for saying, don't be Republican, don't be Democrat, be something more. Be a peacemaker. Know that God brings shalom, and it's present in those situations where this is. Humans are devolved. God saves. And, the problem here is that you and I aren't looking towards it hard enough, and that's why the world looks the way it does. We keep steering into conflict instead of persecution. We keep steering into fixing everything instead of being grieved and letting God reverse it. Lots of things. So Sunday, what we're going to do, and I'm going to try to make it an experienced way of wrestling with law versus gospel. No, hey, it's supposed to be both. We'll never do this perfectly. That's why God keeps calling us back to worship and hearing our confession and forgiving us and trying to form us into people who pronounce the gospel. All right? So there's a work down through Matthew 5, pertinent because we're going to be in these chapters, this discourse for quite a while together. And so this work, hopefully, in future weeks, you'll be like, yeah, I heard him talking about that a couple weeks ago. So hopefully this builds. Hopefully this is worth your time. Hopefully you get something out of me doing this. Hopefully it comes to you and maybe you're bored and it gives you something to think about in your boredom. Besides this, I'm also saying go watch that Devo documentary and tell me what you think. Enjoy them, laugh about the music, see some of the Akron references and things, but also what do you think about some of the ideas that Devo are trying to tell us about? Is there something in there worth thinking about? That documentary is on Netflix. If you just search Devo, you'd find it. All right, so there's all this. I have no idea how long this took. It probably feels to you like it took hours and hours, but I appreciate that you joined me. I hope you heard something in my wrestling with the text right in front of you where I lay out my heart. Hopefully you heard something in that inspires your prayer life and your scripture reading and your openness to God's reversal in your life and in your world. All right, I hope that's something you're open to. Stay safe. I'll look forward to gathering together on Sunday, and I look forward to seeing you soon.